Dry Creek wasn't on most maps anymore, just a quiet speck of desert halfway between Phoenix and nowhere, where the sunsets painted the sky in dusty oranges and purples, and nothing much ever changed. The kind of town where folks still nodded at each other on the street, where gas was cheaper than a soda, and the biggest excitement was the high school football game. On Friday night, Laura Jennings had lived here all her life. 42 years old, shoulder-length auburn hair, usually tied back in a practical ponytail, and eyes that carried more tiredness than she'd admit. She ran the only 24-hour gas station for 50 miles, the kind with creaky linoleum floors, humming fridge coolers, and a coffee pot that never quite got cleaned. Locals loved her. Outsiders didn't notice her. And that was just fine with Laura. It was nearing midnight on a Tuesday when the shift had grown especially quiet. Her son Caleb was asleep upstairs in the small apartment above the store. The radio softly played Patsy Cline while Laura wiped down the counter for the third time. Routine, predictable, safe. That's when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up expecting a trucker or maybe one of the night shift miners from the next town over. Instead, it was a man she didn't recognize. Mid-30s, unshaven, dressed in a faded hoodie and cargo pants. No luggage, no visible car, just him and a phone charger clutched in his hand. He didn't smile, didn't ask for gas or snacks. Just stepped to the counter and said, "Mind if I charge this for a minute?" Laura hesitated. Something about him felt off. Not threatening exactly, just out of place, but her instinct was kindness. That's who she was. "Sure," she said, pointing to the outlet near the coffee machine. "Help yourself." She watched him plug it in and sit silently at a corner table. He never took his eyes off the phone screen, and as the minutes ticked by, something in her gut whispered, "This isn't just another night." The man barely spoke. His eyes flicked constantly between his phone screen and the glass doors, as if expecting someone or something to burst through at any moment. Laura kept herself busy behind the counter, but she couldn't help glancing his way every few minutes. He wasn't like the drifters who occasionally passed through Dry Creek. There was no smell of alcohol, no glazed-over stare. He was sharp, tense, coiled like a spring. After about 15 minutes of silence, Laura offered coffees fresh. Or close enough. The man looked up, hesitated, then nodded once. She poured him a cup and set it down near his table. "No charge," she added. "Looks like you've had a long day." He stared at the coffee as if weighing whether to accept even that small gesture. Finally, he picked it up with both hands, like it was something sacred. "Thank you," he said softly. His voice was rough, like someone who hadn't used it much lately. "No problem," Laura replied, trying to sound casual. "You from around here?" He shook his head. "Just passing through." "Where you headed?" He looked back down at the phone. "Nowhere." "Really?" That answer chilled her more than it should have. Something about the way he said it, like he meant it literally. Like he had no place in the world to land. The minutes ticked on. Occasionally his phone would buzz and he'd snatch it up with urgency, scan the screen, then sigh and put it down. At one point he stood and walked to the restroom, moving with a kind of trained precision. Military, maybe Laura noticed he kept his left hand near his hip at all times, like it had a job to do. Her instincts kicked in. She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but there were too many little red flags piling up. She casually reached under the counter to where she kept the emergency button that alerted the sheriff's office just in case. He returned a minute later, nodded at her, and sat back down. "I'll be gone soon," he said without looking at her. Laura nodded slowly. "No rush, just let me know if you need anything else." Then, almost out of nowhere, he asked, "You have kids?" She blinked one. "Caleb, he's 10. The man smiled faintly. 10's a good age. He took a final sip of his coffee, then checked his phone again, and this time his expression changed. His eyes widened just a little, his jaw tightened. Whatever message he saw, it mattered. Without another word, he unplugged the charger, shoved it into his pocket, and stood. "Thanks for the coffee," he said. And just like that, he walked out the door and disappeared into the night. Laura stepped outside behind him, but there was no car. No sound. Just the wind whispering across the dark desert road. And in that moment, with her hand still resting near her hip, where the emergency button had been moments ago, Laura realized she hadn't asked for his name, and that maybe she should have. The morning sun rose over Dry Creek like it always did, slow amber and quiet, Laura arrived at the gas station at 6:45 a.m., sharp as usual. She unlocked the front doors, flipped the sign to open, and walked inside, the familiar creak of the door echoing across the tiled floor. Everything was where she had left it: the mop bucket in the back corner, the shelf of faded snacks by the register, and the scent of cheap coffee still lingering from the night before. But something felt off. She couldn't quite place it, just a tightness in her gut, like the air was holding its breath. She made herself a coffee unlocked, the restroom restocked the drink cooler, routine steady. And then just as she was stepping behind the counter, the distant sound of engines rumbled through the morning silence. Not one, not two. A whole convoy. The noise grew louder, deeper, heavier. Laura stepped outside, shielding her eyes against the rising sun, and froze, coming down. Route 19 was a line of matte black SUVs and tactical trucks like a scene out of a movie. The kind you see in news clips parked outside embassies or war zones. They didn't slow down. They didn't pause. They pulled straight into her gravel lot, one after another, until the gas station looked like it was being swallowed whole by armored steel and tinted glass. Within seconds, agents were out, not police FBI. She knew the look, the earpieces, the dark jackets, the urgency in their step. One of them, an older man with silver hair and sharp eyes, walked up to her with a badge already in hand. "Ma'am," he said, calm but firm, "we need you to step inside and remain there. This area is now part of an active federal investigation." Laura blinked. "What? Why? What's going on?" He didn't answer. He motioned toward the other agents, who immediately began combing the property, checking behind the dumpsters around the gas pumps, even crawling on the roof. Others rolled out equipment scanners, dogs, drones. It was like watching a hive erupt. Inside the station, Laura stood by the front windows, stunned. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her coffee. She replayed the night before in her mind: the man, the phone, the way he looked at her, the final message he had received. A younger agent entered and walked straight to the table where the man had sat. He pulled on gloves, examined the surface, then held up a small plastic bag. Inside, it was something she hadn't seen before. A thumb drive. It must have been left behind. Deliberately or by mistake, she couldn't say. That same older agent approached her again. His tone was colder now. "Did you speak to the man who was here last night?" Laura nodded, throat dry. "Yeah." He asked to charge his phone. Didn't say much else, looked like he was on the run. The agent studied her for a long beat. "Did he leave anything behind?" "No," she said instinctively, but her mind flashed to the thumb drive. She hadn't noticed it last night. Was that even his? The agent turned to leave, but paused at the door. "If he contacts you again, don't engage. Call us immediately." Laura nodded slowly. The door shut behind him. She stood there alone now, surrounded by the hum of machines and distant radio chatter, her small-town life pulled into something enormous. Something she didn't understand yet. And deep in her bones, she felt it. That man hadn't been passing through. He had chosen her station for a reason. And whatever she had stepped into, it wasn't over. Laura locked the doors after the last agent pulled away, her heart still racing from the whirlwind morning. The gas station looked the same, on the surface coffee pots, brewing fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. But everything felt different now. The silence wasn't comforting anymore. It was dense, suspicious, heavy with questions. She glanced over at the table where the stranger had sat, and then at the thumb drive. It was still there. The agents hadn't taken it after all. Laura walked over slowly, hesitating before picking it up. It was small, black, unmarked, completely ordinary. But somehow, it felt like it weighed more than it should have. She held it in her palm, her thumb brushing across its plastic edge. Whatever was on it had brought the FBI to her doorstep. Whatever was on it had gotten that man hunted, and now it was in her hands. She didn't have a computer at the station, just the old register system and the lottery machine. So, she waited until her shift was over, drove the 3 miles to her trailer, just outside of Dry Creek, and fired up her ancient Dell laptop. It wheezed as it powered on the fan, louder than she remembered. She hesitated for a beat, then plugged in the drive. At first, nothing. Just a single folder titled Circuit Opus. She clicked it. Inside were dozens, no hundreds of encrypted files, names she didn't recognize. Polaris, Sequence, Raven, Nest, 9, Vault, the 31, Recon. Each file looked like it required a separate password, all except one, a video. She opened it, Grainy security footage filled the screen. It showed a dimly lit corridor, maybe a government building or secure facility. A timestamp read March 12th, 2:47 a.m. Men in uniforms moved down the hall, armed, tactical, deliberate. Then an explosion rocked the frame. Alarms. Screaming. The video jumped corrupted before showing something that made Laura's stomach turn. A man in a white lab coat, hands zip-tied, being dragged down the hallway. His badge read, Dr. Alan Krieger, and next to his name, Department of Defense, R&D Division. The feed cut. Laura sat back in her chair, her pulse pounding. What was this classified military abductions, internal sabotage? She played the video again. This time she noticed something else. At the bottom corner of the screen, the logo of the facility flickered into view for a brief second. It was the same eagle insignia she'd seen stitched on the jackets of the FBI agents earlier that day. It wasn't the FBI, at least not officially. Someone had stolen this footage, someone who wanted it out, and that someone had brought it to her. She opened the Properties tab on the file. Last modified 9 hours before the stranger showed up at her gas station. Whatever was happening, it was fresh, immediate. She leaned back in her chair, gripping the sides, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Why her? Why leave it with a stranger in a dusty town nobody cared about? Unless that's exactly why Dry Creek was invisible on the map. No press, no surveillance, no traffic. And Laura, she was nobody. A widow running a dying gas station off the grid. Maybe he'd known that made her the perfect hiding place. Or maybe she was just a decoy. Her phone buzzed, jerking her back to reality. Unknown number 1. Message. They know you have it. No name, no return address. Just that, Laura's blood went cold. She looked out her trailer window. In the distance across the empty field, a car she didn't recognize sat idling near the edge of the road, headlights off, watching, waiting. She shut the laptop, clutching the thumb drive to her chest. This wasn't a mystery anymore. This was survival. The next 48 hours felt like a blur stretched across a nightmare. Laura hadn't slept. Not really. Maybe an hour here, 20 minutes. There, light dozes, each interrupted by the phantom sound of a knock or the shadow of a car passing by her trailer. Her phone never rang again, but the silence was worse. Heavier, like something was ticking and she just couldn't hear it. She'd moved the thumb drive 3 times already. First under the sink, then in her glove box, and now it was buried inside a coffee can under her back porch. But no matter where she put it, it felt like the danger moved with her. Like the countdown wasn't attached to the device, but to her, and it was getting closer. By the second day she noticed the black SUV. It didn't have plates, not that she could see. It was parked across from her gas station, pretending to be inconspicuous, but it was always there. In the rearview mirror when she closed up, reflected in the glass freezer door when she stocked sodas. A dark, patient shadow. They were watching, but they weren't coming, and that's what scared her most. She finally broke down and called the local sheriff, Walt Harmon. He was a good man, the kind who wore his badge like it still meant something, in a town where the most serious crime was overdue library books. Laura didn't give him all the details, just said she thought she was being followed. Walt came by that afternoon, walked out to the SUV, knocked on the driver's window. She watched through the blinds. The window rolled down, but Walt didn't say much. He just stood there, listening. Then he nodded, once turned and walked back across the lot. When he came into the station, he looked pale. "They're federal," he said quietly. Said, "It's a classified operation." I asked for ID. He showed me something, but I couldn't make heads or tails of it. Laura swallowed. Did they say what they wanted? He paused. They said, "You're not a suspect, but that you might be holding evidence." Her heart sank. They said not to interfere. That's an order from the top. Walt looked like he wanted to say more, but he didn't. Just tipped his hat, muttered something about being careful, and left. That night she dug up the drive again. She didn't know why. Maybe because every instinct screamed at her that time was running out. She plugged it into the laptop and stared at the screen, fingers trembling. And that's when she saw it. A new file. She hadn't noticed it before. It was titled Dry Creek Exfil 7Z Encrypted. She double-clicked it, hoping it might ask for a password, hoping it might give her something, but instead it launched a countdown. A red digital timer blinked onto the screen. 23. The seconds started falling. She screamed, tried to shut it off. Clicked everything but the laptop locked up. A message appeared. Secure uplink. Initiated hold for retrieval from where her internet had been off for months. She never paid the bill after January. But then she remembered the stranger. When he'd plugged his phone into her wall charger, he hadn't used the USB port. He had plugged into the Ethernet jack, one that hadn't been connected in years. Unless she ran to the back of the trailer to the breaker box, the satellite dish. The old HughesNet system that came with the place had never been properly shut down. It was still mounted on the roof, still physically wired in. And when he plugged in, he'd used her station to upload something. And now, it was finishing the job. She stared at the timer, 003802. Was it a file transfer? Was it a trigger? Was something going to happen? She called the FBI's local field office, but the line dropped twice. When it finally connected, all she got was a monotone voice. We cannot confirm or deny involvement in any operation in your area. Click 002947. Her chest tightened. She grabbed the laptop and the thumb drive and ran out of the trailer across the dirt lot into the gas station. She slammed the laptop down on the counter and yanked the drive free, but the countdown didn't stop. That's when she realized the drive wasn't running the clock. The upload was from the laptop and it had already finished. The moment she had plugged it in again, it picked up where it left off, and whatever was on that drive was now out there. She looked up and saw the SUV. The door opened. 2 men stepped out. No suits, no badges, just dark clothes. One had gloves on. They weren't here to ask questions. Laura reached for the panic button under the register, one that alerted the sheriff, but it was already too late. The lights in the station flickered, then went out. Laura stumbled backward into the darkened gas station as the 2 men advanced. Their footsteps echoed in the dead silence, the only light now coming from the flickering open sign that buzzed weakly above the door. Her heart was pounding so loud she could barely hear her own breath. Laura Griffin? The taller one asked. His voice was flat rehearsed, like this wasn't the first time he'd said that name under stress. She didn't answer, just clutched the laptop tighter, her fingers slick with sweat. We need the drive, the other one said. His tone was sharper and patient. Now I don't know what's on it, she replied, backing toward the coffee machines. I didn't look, I swear. They exchanged a glance. One of them reached into his jacket. She panicked, grabbed the nearest thing, a metal coffee pot, and hurled it. It shattered against the wall behind them, sending shards and scalded liquid everywhere. They didn't even flinch. Ms. Griffin, this is your final warning, the taller one said. Hand it over, and you walk away. Something snapped in her. You people show up in the middle of nowhere, scare the hell out of me, say nothing for days, and now you want me to just hand it over. He took a step forward, and that's when the sound came. It was subtle at first, like wind through a broken window, then louder. A low, rhythmic whoop, whoop, whoop that made the whole station tremble. Helicopters. More than one. The agents froze, looked at each other. One reached for a device on his belt, some kind of radio. It crackled, but there was no voice on the other end. They were being jammed. Laura ducked behind the counter, heart in her throat as spotlights cut through the darkness outside. The low rumble of engines, diesel powerful, shook the ground beneath her feet. She crawled to the side window, peeked through a crack in the blinds. Black SUVs, armored vans, agents in full tactical gear, pouring out, and not just FBI Homeland Security. NSA, something she didn't even recognize. Badges with an eagle emblem and no agency name. Guns drawn, the 2 men inside backed away from the door, slowly hands raised. They weren't resisting, but they weren't surrendering either. Just standing, waiting for the signal. Laura felt it then, that terrible wrongness, that this wasn't about her, or even the drive. This was about something already set in motion, because the countdown had reached 0, and nothing had happened. No explosion. No virus. No EMP. But the quiet was worse. Outside, one of the new agents shouted into a megaphone, "Step away from the civilian hands where we can see them." The 2 men didn't move. Then, without warning, a pulse rippled through the gas station like static through the air. Every screen flashed white. The neon lights burst with a pop. The radio behind the counter screeched with interference before falling dead. Then silence again. "Ma'am," a voice called out. "Are you all right?" She turned. A new man stood in the doorway. He was older, gray-haired with a scar down the side of his jaw. His badge read DOD, Signal Intelligence Division. We've been tracking that device since it was activated in El Paso. He said, "You didn't know, did you?" Laura shook her head. He nodded. "We didn't think so. But you made a call from a public phone 3 days ago. That's what saved your life." She blinked, stunned. "I called Walt, the sheriff. He logged it. Properly, protocol works, sometimes." She looked at the two men being restrained by agents now, hands zip-tied, faces emotionless. Who were they? The agent didn't answer at first. Finally, he said, "They were part of a sleeper cell. Domestic embedded for years. That drive. It didn't contain a virus. It was the trigger. A trigger for what?" He looked her dead in the eye for a signal that never came. Then he turned to the other agents and barked orders. The scene dissolved into chaos. Vehicles' gear, shouting like a war zone, had passed through and moved on. And Laura. She just stood there clutching the laptop like it was still ticking. But the danger was over, or so they said.